Picture this. You're at your sister's wedding reception, surrounded by family, when your older brother grabs the microphone for his toast. Instead of heartfelt words, he decides to publicly humiliate you in front of 200 guests, calling you a college dropout who'll never amount to anything. The room goes silent. Your face burns with embarrassment. But then, someone unexpected stands up from the back of the room. And what happens next will leave your brother speechless and change everything you thought you knew about family, success, and the power of keeping secrets. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The string quartet had just finished playing when Marcus Chen stepped up to the microphone at the Riverside Country Club. Sophia Adams watched from her assigned table near the back, fork halfway to her mouth with a bite of salmon, as her older brother adjusted his bow tie with that familiar smirk she'd grown to dread over the years. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus began, his voice carrying that practiced confidence he'd perfected during his law school presentations, "I'd like to say a few words about my beautiful sister Emily on her special day." Emily beamed from the head table, her white dress catching the soft glow of the crystal chandeliers. Her new husband, David Martinez, squeezed her hand as the reception hall of 200 guests turned their attention to Marcus. Sophia shifted uncomfortably in her chair, something in her brother's tone setting off alarm bells in her mind. "Emily has always been the responsible one in our family," Marcus continued, raising his champagne flute. "The one who followed through on her commitments, finished what she started, and made our parents proud with her dedication to excellence." Their mother, Patricia Adams, dabbed at her eyes with a tissue from the family table, completely missing the subtle edge creeping into Marcus's voice. But Sophia heard it. She'd been hearing variations of that tone for the past 3 years, ever since she'd made the decision that had apparently branded her as the family disappointment. "Unlike some people in our family," Marcus said, his gaze finding Sophia in the crowd, "Emily understood that when you start something, you finish it." She didn't give up on her dreams when things got challenging. She didn't walk away from opportunities that most people would kill for. The reception hall began to quiet, guests sensing the shift in tone. Sophia felt her cheeks burning as she realized where this was heading. Her younger cousin Jake, sitting next to her, shot her a concerned look, but she kept her eyes fixed on her plate, willing herself to become invisible. "Emily graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern," Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger, more pointed. "She earned her master's degree in marketing, landed a fantastic job at Peterson & Associates, and now she's marrying a wonderful man who shares her values of commitment and perseverance." David looked increasingly uncomfortable at the head table, glancing between Marcus and Emily with confusion written across his face. Emily's smile had frozen in place, her eyes darting toward Sophia with growing concern. "So let's raise our glasses," Marcus said, lifting his champagne higher, "to Emily, who proves that success comes to those who don't quit when the going gets tough, to someone who doesn't throw away golden opportunities because college gets a little difficult, to someone who, unlike certain family members, doesn't drop out of an Ivy League school to chase some ridiculous pipe dream of becoming an artist." The silence that followed was deafening. Sophia felt every eye in the room turn toward her, the weight of 200 stares pressing down like a physical force. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped her napkin, her carefully applied makeup doing nothing to hide the flush of humiliation spreading across her face. "Marcus," their father, Robert Adams, said sharply from the family table, his voice cutting through the tension. But Marcus was on a roll now, 3 glasses of champagne giving him the liquid courage to say everything he'd apparently been storing up for years. "I mean, really?" Marcus laughed, but it came out harsh and bitter. "Who walks away from Columbia University? Who throws away a full scholarship because they decide they want to play with paintbrushes instead of building a real career? Some of us work our entire lives for opportunities like that, and others just waste them." Sophia's cousin Jake reached over and touched her arm gently, but she barely noticed. The room felt like it was spinning, faces blurring together as she fought back tears. She'd known Marcus resented her decision to leave Columbia during her junior year. But she'd never imagined he'd choose Emily's wedding, Emily's special day, to air his grievances publicly. "So here's to Emily," Marcus concluded, seemingly oblivious to the horrified expressions of the wedding guests, "for showing us all what real success looks like. For proving that some of us have what it takes while others—" He paused dramatically, his eyes finding Sophia again. "Well, let's just say some of us will always be a family disappointment." He drained his champagne glass in one gulp and set it down on the table with a sharp clink that seemed to echo through the silent reception hall. Emily had gone pale, her hands pressed to her mouth in shock. David was half standing, clearly debating whether to intervene, while their parents looked mortified beyond words. Sophia felt like she might be sick. 3 years of family dinners where Marcus made subtle digs about her artistic phase. 3 years of him introducing her to his law school. Friends as, "my sister who used to go to Columbia." 3 years of him questioning every life choice she'd made, every small success she'd achieved, every step she'd taken toward building the life she actually wanted rather than the one he thought she should want. But this was different. This was public humiliation on a scale she'd never experienced. This was her brother using her sister's wedding reception as a platform to systematically tear her down in front of everyone they knew. Family friends, Emily's colleagues, David's relatives who barely knew the family dynamics, but were now getting a front-row seat to the Addams family dysfunction. The silence stretched on, broken only by the soft clinking of silverware as servers continued clearing tables, apparently unsure whether to stop working during this unexpected family drama. Someone coughed nervously. A baby started crying from somewhere in the back of the room, the sound seeming amplified in the awkward quiet. Sophia took a shaky breath, preparing to excuse herself to the bathroom where she could fall apart in private, when movement near the back of the room caught her attention. An older woman in an elegant navy dress was rising from her chair at one of the tables reserved for Emily's work colleagues. The woman was perhaps 60, with silver hair styled in a sophisticated bob and the kind of confident bearing that suggested she was accustomed to commanding rooms. Sophia didn't recognize her, but something about the way she stood, calm, deliberate, with a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth, made everyone in the reception hall turn to look at her. "Excuse me," the woman said, her voice carrying easily across the room without seeming to strain. "I don't believe we've been introduced. I'm Dr. Catherine Walsh." She paused, letting the name settle over the crowd. Marcus, still standing by the microphone, looked confused, glancing toward Emily as if she might explain who this woman was and why she was interrupting his toast. "I work with Emily at Peterson & Associates," Dr. Walsh continued, taking a few steps closer to the front of the room. "But that's not why I'm standing up right now." The reception hall had gone completely silent again, but this time it felt different. Instead of the uncomfortable tension that had followed Marcus's speech, there was now a sense of anticipation, as if everyone could feel that something significant was about to happen. "You see," Dr. Walsh said, her eyes finding Sophia in the crowd, "I couldn't help but overhear the previous speaker's comments about college dropouts and wasted opportunities, and I felt compelled to share something that might provide some perspective on the situation." Sophia felt her heart hammering against her ribs. She had no idea who this woman was or why she was involving herself in their family drama. But something in Dr. Walsh's tone suggested that whatever she was about to say would change the trajectory of this entire evening. Dr. Catherine Walsh moved with purpose toward the front of the reception hall, her heels clicking softly against the polished marble floor. Every head turned to follow her progress, creating a ripple effect of whispered questions and curious glances. Marcus remained frozen by the microphone, his earlier confidence evaporating as he tried to process this unexpected interruption. 3 years ago, Dr. Walsh began, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to addressing large audiences, I received a portfolio submission that stopped me in my tracks. It wasn't the typical application we usually see at the Metropolitan Museum of Contemporary Arts. This one was different. Sophia's breath caught in her throat. The Metropolitan Museum of Contemporary Arts, one of the most prestigious cultural institutions in the country. She'd submitted her portfolio there on a whim, never expecting to hear back, and when months passed without response, she'd assumed it had been relegated to some intern's rejection pile. The portfolio contained a series of mixed media pieces exploring themes of identity, family expectations, and the courage required to forge your own path, Dr. Walsh continued, her gaze steady on Sophia. The technical skill was impressive, but what truly captured my attention was the emotional depth. These weren't just pretty pictures. They were visual narratives that spoke to something profound about the human experience. Marcus's face had gone from confused to pale, his grip tightening on the microphone stand. Their parents were leaning forward at the family table, hanging on every word. Emily's mouth had fallen open slightly, her wedding forgotten as she processed what was unfolding. The artist had included a brief statement about leaving traditional academic pursuits to follow their passion. Despite significant family pressure to conform to more conventional expectations of success, Dr. Walsh said, a slight smile tugging at her lips. I remember thinking how rare it was to encounter someone with both the talent and the backbone to choose authenticity over approval. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The wedding guests were completely silent now, the earlier discomfort replaced by rapt attention. Even the servers had stopped moving, standing frozen with their serving trays as they listened to this unexpected revelation. We offered that artist a solo exhibition, Dr. Walsh announced, her words landing like stones dropped into still water. Their first major show opened 6 months ago to critical acclaim. The New York Arts Review called it a stunning debut that announces the arrival of a significant new voice in contemporary art. The entire collection sold out on opening night. Sophia felt dizzy, the room seeming to tilt around her. She remembered the phone call, the gallery representative who'd reached out about an exhibition opportunity. She'd been so overwhelmed, so grateful for the chance, that she'd never made the connection between her original portfolio submission and this incredible opportunity that had seemingly appeared out of nowhere. But here's what made this story even more remarkable, Dr. Walsh continued, her voice growing warmer. When I met with the artist to discuss the exhibition details, they insisted on donating a portion of the proceeds to a scholarship fund for students from low-income families pursuing arts education. Not because they had money to spare, they were still working 3 part-time jobs to make rent, but because they understood what it meant to have barriers standing between you and your dreams. The revelation hit the reception hall like a physical force. Sophia heard her mother gasp, saw her father's hand fly to cover his mouth. Jake squeezed her shoulder, his eyes wide with amazement and pride. That scholarship fund has already helped 12 students access arts programs they couldn't otherwise afford, Dr. Walsh said, her smile broadening. And the artist? Well, they've been invited to participate in a group exhibition at the Whitney next spring, alongside some of the most established names in contemporary art. Marcus looked like he might collapse. The microphone slipped from his suddenly nerveless fingers, hitting the floor with a harsh screech of feedback that made several guests wince. His face had gone from pale to gray, his earlier smugness replaced by dawning horror as he began to understand the magnitude of his miscalculation. You see, Dr. Walsh said, picking up the microphone and speaking directly to him, when you dismiss someone as a college dropout, you might want to consider that they may have left one path because they found a better one. When you mock someone's pipe dreams, you might be revealing more about your own limited vision than their supposed failures. She turned back to address the entire room, her voice carrying the weight of decades in the art world, of recognizing talent and nurturing creativity in all its forms. The artist I'm speaking about understood something that many people never grasp, that success isn't always measured by traditional metrics. Sometimes it's measured by the courage to disappoint people in order to become who you're meant to be. Sometimes it's measured by the impact you have on others, the barriers you break down, the paths you create for those who come after you. Sophia was crying now, But these weren't tears of humiliation. They were tears of validation, of recognition, of finally hearing someone articulate what she'd been trying to prove to her family for 3 years. That her choice hadn't been about giving up or taking the easy way out. It had been about having the faith in herself to pursue something meaningful, even when everyone around her questioned her judgment. "I've been in the art world for over 30 years, Dr. Walsh said, her voice softening. "I've worked with artists who graduated from the most prestigious programs, who followed every conventional step, who did everything they were supposed to do. And I've worked with artists who forged their own paths, who left traditional structures behind to create something entirely new. Guess which group has produced more groundbreaking work?" The question hung in the air, rhetorical but pointed. Marcus had sunk into a nearby chair, his head in his hands, the full weight of his public humiliation beginning to settle over him. Several guests were pulling out their phones, undoubtedly Googling Sophia's name and the Metropolitan Museum to verify this incredible story. "The artist's name," Dr. Walsh said, her eyes finding Sophia one final time, "is Sophia Adams. And she is not a failure, a disappointment, or someone who gave up on her dreams. She's one of the most promising emerging talents I've encountered in my career, and I predict she'll be a household name in the art world within the next 5 years." The reception hall erupted. Guests began applauding, first tentatively, then with growing enthusiasm as the full impact of Dr. Walsh's revelation sank in. Sophia's parents were on their feet, tears streaming down both their faces as they clapped with fierce pride. Emily had abandoned all pretense of bridal composure and was crying openly, her hands pressed to her heart, but it was Jake's reaction that meant the most to Sophia. Her younger cousin, who had defended her through every family argument, who had never stopped believing in her even when she'd stopped believing in herself, was standing beside her with tears in his eyes and the biggest smile she'd ever seen. "Holy shit. Sophia," he whispered, his voice filled with awe, "you're famous. You're actually famous." Through the applause and the chaos, Sophia caught sight of Marcus, still seated and staring at her with an expression she'd never seen before, a mixture of shock, shame, and something that might have been the beginning of respect. For the first time in 3 years, her older brother looked at her and saw not a disappointment, but a person who had accomplished something extraordinary. Dr. Walsh made her way through the crowd toward Sophia's table, her smile warm and genuine. As she approached, Sophia realized that this woman, this accomplished professional who had just defended her in front of 200 people, was more than just a colleague of Emily's. She was someone who had believed in Sophia's talent when Sophia herself had been struggling to maintain faith in her chosen path. Dr. Walsh reached Sophia's table as the applause began to die down, extending her hand with a warmth that seemed to encompass years of unspoken mentorship. "Ms. Adams," she said, "I've been hoping for an opportunity to meet you in person." Sophia stood on shaking legs, still processing the surreal turn of events. "Dr. Walsh, I had no idea you were here. I mean, I knew Emily worked at Peterson and Associates, but I never connected. Your sister has been singing your praises for months without realizing she was talking to someone who already knew your work," Dr. Walsh said with a gentle laugh. "When she mentioned her talented artist sister who had left Columbia to pursue her dreams, I wondered if it might be you." Tonight confirmed it. The reception was slowly returning to its normal buzz of conversation. But Sophia could feel the lingering attention, the curious glances and whispered discussions about what had just transpired. Emily appeared at her side, having navigated through the crowd with her wedding dress bunched in her hands to avoid tripping. "Sophia, why didn't you tell us?" Emily asked, her voice thick with emotion. "The solo exhibition, the Whitney invitation, we had no idea you'd achieved so much. Because every time I tried to share good news, Marcus would find a way to diminish it," Sophia replied, the words tumbling out with 3 years of suppressed frustration. "When I got my first gallery showing at the community center, he called it playing dress up with finger paints. When I sold my first piece, he said it was probably someone taking pity on me. I stopped sharing because it hurt too much to have my victories treated like consolation prizes." Dr. Walsh's expression grew thoughtful as she observed the family dynamic playing out before her. May I ask you something, Sophia? What made you leave Columbia specifically? In my experience, that decision usually comes from a moment of clarity rather than confusion. Sophia glanced toward her parents, who had approached during the conversation, their faces showing a mixture of pride and regret. Her father, Robert, still looked stunned by the evening's revelations, while her mother, Patricia, seemed to be seeing her daughter clearly for perhaps the first time in years. I was majoring in business administration, Sophia began, her voice growing stronger as she spoke, following the path everyone expected, taking classes that felt like they were designed for someone else entirely. I was spending 4 hours every night on assignments that felt meaningless, then staying up until 3 a.m. working on art projects that weren't even for credit, because that was the only time I felt alive. She paused, remembering those exhausting months of trying to be two different people simultaneously. The breaking point came during my junior year. I was in corporate finance, and Professor Henderson was explaining hostile takeover strategies. Everyone around me was taking notes, completely engaged, and I realized I was sketching portraits of my classmates in the margins instead of listening. I'd been doing it unconsciously for weeks. Patricia Adams reached out and touched her daughter's arm. You never told us you were struggling. Because I wasn't struggling with the academics, Mom. I was getting A's in all my business classes. I was struggling with the person I was becoming. I was turning into someone who could analyze profit margins and market penetration, but couldn't remember the last time I'd created something that mattered to me. Dr. Walsh nodded approvingly. That kind of self-awareness at 20 is remarkable. Most people spend decades in careers that drain their souls before they recognize the disconnect. The day I decided to leave, I'd just finished a presentation on quarterly earnings projections for a fictional company, Sophia continued. I nailed it, got the highest grade in the class. But walking back to my dorm, I passed the art building and saw students working on a mural about climate change. Their faces were lit up with purpose, with passion, with this sense that what they were doing mattered beyond the grade they'd receive. She looked directly at Marcus, who had finally stood and was hovering at the edge of their group, his earlier bravado completely deflated. I realized I could spend the next 40 years becoming extremely competent at something that left me feeling empty. Or I could take a risk on the thing that made me feel most like myself. It wasn't about taking the easy path. Leaving Columbia meant giving up financial security, family approval, and a clearly defined future. It was terrifying, but you did it anyway, Dr. Walsh observed. I spent 2 weeks researching every possible alternative. I looked into transferring to art programs, taking a gap year, double majoring, anything that might let me keep one foot in the safe world while exploring the uncertain one. But everything felt like a compromise that would satisfy no one, including myself. Jake, who had been listening intently, spoke up. I remember that phone call. You cried for like 2 hours explaining your decision to leave. Because I knew how disappointed everyone would be, Sophia said, her voice catching slightly. And I was right. The family dinners, the sideways comments, the constant questions about when I'd come to my senses and go back to school. Marcus wasn't wrong that it hurt our parents. They didn't understand why I'd throw away what they saw as a golden opportunity. Robert Adams cleared his throat, his voice gruff with emotion. We thought we were protecting you from making a mistake that would limit your options. But your options weren't limited, Dr. Walsh interjected. They were focused. There's a significant difference. You chose depth over breadth, passion over security, authenticity over approval. Those aren't the choices of someone running away from responsibility. They're the choices of someone running toward their purpose. Marcus finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Sophia, I owe you an apology. A massive one. What I said tonight was unforgivable. Sophia turned to face her brother, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time in years. The golden child who had always excelled at meeting expectations, who had never questioned whether the path he was on was the right one for him, who had perhaps been as trapped by success as she had been by the fear of failure. Marcus, can I ask you something? She said. Are you happy? I mean, genuinely happy with the law career, the firm, the trajectory you're on? The question caught him off guard. He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it, his face cycling through emotions as he considered his answer. I don't know, he finally admitted. I'm successful. I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. But happy? He shrugged helplessly. I spend 60 hours a week on cases I don't care about, working for partners who treat junior associates like disposable resources. I can't remember the last time I felt excited about going to work. Then maybe, Sophia said gently. Your anger wasn't really about my choices. Maybe it was about watching someone have the courage to choose differently when you felt stuck in your own decisions. The observation hung between them, revealing layers of family dynamics that had been building for years. Dr. Walsh watched the exchange with the keen interest of someone who understood that art wasn't the only thing requiring courage. Sometimes, the most challenging medium to work with was a family relationship that had been shaped by misunderstanding and misdirected resentment. The beautiful thing about both of your stories, Dr. Walsh said, addressing both siblings, is that they're still being written. Sophia, your career is just beginning to flourish. Marcus, recognizing dissatisfaction with your current path is the first step toward finding one that truly fulfills you. There's no rule that says you can't change course when you discover what actually matters to you. Emily, who had been quietly absorbing the conversation, suddenly laughed through her tears. This is the most meaningful wedding toast we could have asked for. Not the traditional kind, but definitely unforgettable. The comment broke some of the tension, drawing smiles from the family group. David appeared beside his new wife, having waited patiently for the family crisis to reach a resolution before reclaiming his bride's attention. So, he said with a grin, should we officially restart the reception now that we've resolved 3 years of family drama? David's comment sparked genuine laughter from the group, but Dr. Walsh raised her hand with a knowing smile. Actually, before we return to celebrating Emily and David's beautiful union, there's one more thing I'd like to share. Something that might interest this entire family. She reached into her small evening clutch and pulled out what appeared to be an elegant business card. But as she handed it to Sophia, it became clear it was something more substantial. The Whitney exhibition I mentioned isn't just any group show, Dr. Walsh explained, her eyes twinkling with the pleasure of delivering unexpected news. It's called Courage in Contemporary Voices, and it's specifically designed to showcase artists who have made significant personal sacrifices to pursue their authentic creative vision. The museum board specifically requested artists whose work emerges from the tension between societal expectations and individual truth. Sophia stared at the card, which contained details about a preliminary meeting scheduled for the following month. The Whitney Museum of American Art, one of the most prestigious institutions in the country, a place she'd visited as a teenager and never dared imagine her work might someday hang. But here's what makes this particularly special, Dr. Walsh continued. The exhibition is being sponsored by the Harrison Foundation, which provides grants to emerging artists who demonstrate both exceptional talent and commitment to social impact through their work. Your scholarship fund caught their attention? Patricia Adams gasped audibly. The Harrison Foundation was well known even to people outside the art world, their grants legendary for launching careers and funding projects that changed communities. Sophia felt her knees go weak. The Foundation is offering you a $50,000 grant to expand your scholarship program and fund a year-long residency program for underprivileged youth interested in the arts, Dr. Walsh announced. They want to discuss creating a permanent program that would be housed at the Metropolitan Museum of Contemporary Arts, with you serving as the founding director. The reception hall seemed to spin around Sophia. A year ago, she'd been serving tables at 3 different restaurants to pay rent on a studio apartment she shared with 2 other struggling artists. 6 months ago, she'd been questioning whether leaving Columbia had been a massive mistake that would haunt her forever. Now she was being offered the opportunity to not only establish herself as a professional artist, but to create something that would help other young people navigate the same difficult choices she'd faced. Marcus stepped forward, his face transformed by an expression Sophia had never seen before. genuine admiration mixed with profound regret. Sophia, I don't even know how to begin apologizing for what I said tonight. What I've been saying for 3 years. Marcus, Sophia began, but he held up his hand. No, let me finish. I need to say this. He looked around at their parents, at Emily and David, at the wedding guests who were still watching this family drama unfold with fascination. I've spent 3 years being angry at you for having the courage to do something I was too scared to even consider. Every time someone asked about my brilliant sister who left Columbia to become an artist, I felt embarrassed, not for you, but for myself, because I was stuck in a career that pays well, but leaves me feeling empty. He ran his hand through his hair, disheveling the careful styling he'd done for the wedding. You know what I do most days? I review contracts for corporate mergers that eliminate jobs and consolidate power. I help wealthy companies find legal loopholes to avoid paying fair wages. I'm very good at it, and it makes me feel terrible about myself. Robert Adams looked stricken. Marcus, why didn't you tell us you were unhappy? Because you were so proud of me, Marcus replied, his voice breaking slightly. Because everyone kept talking about how responsible and successful I was compared to Sophia's risky choices. I was trapped by your approval the same way Sophia was hurt by your disapproval. Dr. Walsh observed this family revelation with the compassion of someone who had witnessed many similar moments of truth throughout her career. It's remarkable how often families create false dichotomies, she said gently. The responsible child versus the creative child, the safe choice versus the risky choice, success versus fulfillment. As if these things exist in opposition rather than being different facets of a complete life. Emily, who had been uncharacteristically quiet during this exchange, suddenly spoke up. Can I say something? This is my wedding, so I'm claiming my right to make a toast too. She gestured for the microphone, which Jake quickly retrieved from where Marcus had dropped it earlier. Emily's voice was steady but emotional as she addressed the room. 3 weeks ago, David and I were having dinner with some of his colleagues, and one of them mentioned seeing an incredible art exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum. She couldn't stop talking about this one piece, a mixed media installation about family expectations and finding your own voice. She said it moved her to tears, that it perfectly captured the struggle of disappointing people you love in order to become who you're meant to be. She paused, looking directly at Sophia with tears in her eyes. I knew immediately she was talking about your work. Soph, I'd seen the sketches you did during college, the pieces you created in that tiny studio apartment. I recognized your artistic voice even through a stranger's description. And I felt this incredible surge of pride, followed immediately by guilt because I realized I'd never properly told you how amazing I think you are. The reception hall was completely silent again. But this time, the attention felt supportive rather than voyeuristic. Marcus, you talked about Sophia not finishing what she started, but that's not what happened. She started something new, something that mattered to her. And now she's building a career that not only fulfills her creatively, but actively helps other people pursue their dreams. How is that not the definition of success? Emily turned to address the entire room. My sister taught me something important about courage. It's not about making choices that everyone understands or approves of. It's about making choices that align with your values, even when those choices require sacrificing easier options. She raised her champagne glass, her wedding dress catching the light as she moved. So here's my toast to Sophia Adams, who taught our entire family that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is disappoint people temporarily in order to become someone they can be genuinely proud of, permanently. The applause that followed was different from the earlier response to Dr. Walsh's revelation. This was family applause, sibling applause, the sound of people who had misunderstood someone they loved finally seeing her clearly. But it was Marcus's response that surprised everyone most. Instead of applauding, he walked directly to Sophia and pulled her into a fierce hug that lasted several long moments. I'm so sorry, he whispered in her ear. I'm so proud of you, and I'm so sorry it took me 3 years and a public humiliation to figure out how to say that. Sophia hugged him back, feeling 3 years of tension and hurt beginning to dissolve. "Marcus, you don't have to apologize anymore. But can I ask you something?" He pulled back to look at her. "Anything." "That thing Dr. Walsh said about there being no rule against changing course when you discover what actually matters to you? She was talking to both of us. What would you do if you weren't afraid of disappointing anyone?" The question caught him off guard, but this time instead of deflecting or changing the subject, he actually considered it seriously. "I've been thinking about that a lot lately," he admitted. "There's this pro bono program at our firm that I've been avoiding because it doesn't count toward partnership track. But it's the only part of the job that makes me feel like I'm actually helping people instead of just shuffling money around." Dr. Walsh, who had been listening to this conversation with obvious interest, stepped forward. "Marcus, what kind of law does the pro bono program focus on?" "Immigration advocacy mostly, helping people navigate asylum processes, family reunification cases, that kind of thing. It's incredibly complex work, but when you help someone bring their children to safety..." He trailed off, his expression growing thoughtful. "There are several foundations that fund legal advocacy programs," Dr. Walsh said. "Organizations that specifically look for attorneys willing to leave corporate law to focus on social justice work. The pay cut would be significant, but the impact would be everything Sophia's talking about," Marcus finished, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Purpose over profit. Meaning over money." Sophia grabbed his hand. "We could both be the family disappointments together." Marcus laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his entire face. "You know what? That sounds perfect." The wedding reception had transformed into something entirely different from what anyone had planned. Guests who had initially come for a traditional celebration were now witnessing what could only be described as a family renaissance. With conversations about purpose and authenticity spreading throughout the room like ripples in a pond. Dr. Walsh excused herself briefly to speak with Emily's colleagues from Peterson and Associates, leaving the Adams family to process the extraordinary revelations of the evening. But her departure created space for other conversations that had been building beneath the surface for years. Patricia Adams approached her children with tears in her eyes. But these weren't tears of sadness. "I owe both of you apologies," she began, her voice trembling with emotion. "Sophia, we pushed you toward business school because we were terrified of watching you struggle financially as an artist. We saw your talent, but we also saw how difficult that path could be." She turned to Marcus. "And you, sweetheart, we were so proud of your achievements that we never thought to ask if they were making you happy. We assumed success and fulfillment were the same thing." Robert Adams nodded, placing his arm around his wife's shoulders. "Your mother's right. We thought we were protecting both of you, but we ended up creating pressure that neither of you needed. Sophia, watching you build something meaningful despite our doubts. That takes a strength we didn't give you enough credit for. And Marcus," he continued, "knowing you've been miserable for 3 years while we celebrated your accomplishments, that's our failure as parents. We should have been paying attention to your happiness, not just your resume." Jake, who had been quietly observing this family transformation, suddenly spoke up. "Can I just say something here? I'm 22, so maybe I don't have the right to give anyone advice. But watching this whole thing unfold tonight, it seems like everyone's been living for everyone else instead of for themselves." He gestured around the reception hall, where other families were clearly having their own intense conversations inspired by what they'd witnessed. Like, look around. Half the people here are probably questioning their own choices right now. "That guy over there..." He pointed discreetly toward a middle-aged man in an expensive suit who was deep in conversation with his teenage daughter. "He's been staring at his phone all night, probably thinking about the consulting job he hates. And that woman by the dessert table has been crying since Dr. Walsh's speech, and I bet it's not because she's sad." Indeed, the reception had taken on an unexpectedly profound atmosphere. What had begun as a public humiliation had somehow catalyzed broader conversations about authenticity, courage, and the true meaning of success. Emily laughed, wiping away her own tears. "Leave it to our family to turn my wedding into a life coaching seminar for 200 people. Actually," David said, pulling his new wife closer. "I think this might be the most meaningful wedding reception ever. How many couples can say their celebration helped multiple families have breakthrough conversations about living authentically?" Dr. Walsh returned to their group, her expression bright with excitement. "I hope you don't mind, but I've been having fascinating conversations with your other guests. It seems tonight's events have inspired quite a few people to reconsider their own paths." She gestured toward Emily's colleague from Peterson and Associates. "Jennifer over there just told me she's been writing a novel for 5 years, but never had the courage to submit it anywhere. She wants to know if you'd be willing to talk with her about taking creative risks." Sophia felt a warm flush of recognition. "Of course. That's exactly the kind of conversation I'd love to have. And Marcus," Dr. Walsh continued, "I took the liberty of mentioning your interest in immigration law to a friend of mine who runs a legal advocacy nonprofit. She happened to be here tonight as someone's +1, and she's very interested in speaking with you about opportunities." Marcus looked stunned. "Dr. Walsh, you didn't have to—" "Nonsense. Networking is just connecting people who can help each other create meaningful work. Besides, after watching your family's transformation tonight, I'm convinced that both of you are going to do extraordinary things once you're aligned with your authentic purposes." Emily suddenly grabbed Sophia's hand. "Wait, I just realized something. The Harrison Foundation grant, $50,000 to expand your scholarship program. Do you have any idea how many students that could help?" Sophia's mind was already racing with possibilities. "I've been keeping a waiting list of kids who want to apply for the existing scholarships, but we don't have funding for. There are over 60 names on that list right now. With proper funding, we could create a summer-intensive program, maybe even partner with local schools to integrate arts education into their regular curriculum. And if Marcus transitions to nonprofit legal work," Jake added, getting caught up in the excitement, "he could help with the legal structure for the foundation. Make sure it's set up to have maximum impact." The conversation was interrupted by the band leader approaching their table. "Excuse me, folks, but we're ready to start the dancing portion of the evening if the family is ready to move forward." Emily and David exchanged glances, then burst into laughter. "Yes, absolutely. But first, I have one more announcement to make." She signaled for the microphone again. And the reception hall gradually quieted as guests turned their attention back to the bride. "David and I want to thank everyone for sharing this incredible evening with us," Emily began. "What started as a wedding celebration has become something much more meaningful. A reminder that the people we love most deserve our support in pursuing their authentic dreams. Even when those dreams don't match our expectations," she paused, looking around the room at faces that had been transformed by the evening's revelations. "So in honor of tonight, and in honor of my sister's courage in following her heart, David and I have decided to make our own announcement. Instead of traditional wedding gifts, we're asking our guests to consider making donations to Sophia's scholarship fund. We want our wedding to be remembered not just as the day we committed to each other, but as the day we all committed to supporting young people who need help pursuing their creative dreams." The applause that followed was thunderous, but it was Marcus who stood up first, pulling out his phone. "I'll start. Consider this my real wedding gift to Emily and David, and my apology gift to Sophia." Within minutes, other guests were following suit, pulling out their phones to contribute to the scholarship fund. The energy in the room had shifted completely from traditional wedding celebration to something resembling a fundraising gala for the arts. Dr. Walsh watched this transformation with obvious delight. "In 30 years of working in arts administration, I've never seen anything like this. You're going to raise more money tonight than most established nonprofits raise in a year." Sophia felt overwhelmed by the generosity and support surrounding her. Just hours earlier, she'd been sitting at this same table, humiliated and questioning every choice she'd made in the past 3 years. Now she was surrounded by family who finally understood her path, colleagues who believed in her work, and a room full of people inspired to support young artists facing the same challenges she'd overcome. "There's something else," Dr. Walsh said quietly, leaning closer to Sophia. "The Whitney exhibition isn't just about displaying your work. They're planning to document the entire story. Your journey from Columbia dropout to emerging artist, the scholarship program you created, tonight's incredible family reconciliation. They want to create an installation that tells the complete narrative of what it means to choose authenticity over approval. She smiled. They're calling it the Adams Documentation, a multimedia piece that includes your artwork, video interviews with scholarship recipients, and yes, even footage from tonight if your family consents. They believe your story could inspire thousands of young people who are struggling with similar choices. Marcus laughed, shaking his head in amazement. 6 hours ago, I thought I was giving a toast about responsibility and traditional success. Now I'm going to be part of a museum exhibition about the courage to disappoint people. The irony is perfect, Sophia said, squeezing her brother's hand. Sometimes life writes better endings than we could ever imagine. As the band began playing and couples moved toward the dance floor, the Adams family remained at their table for a few more moments, absorbing the magnitude of how completely their relationships had transformed in a single evening. You know what the best part is? Emily said, watching her parents dance together for the first time in years, their faces radiant with joy and relief. We're finally a family that's proud of each other for the right reasons. 3 months later, Sophia stood in the pristine white gallery space of the Whitney Museum, watching installation crews carefully position the final elements of the Adams Documentation. The exhibition had grown far beyond anything she could have imagined that night at Emily's wedding reception. The centerpiece was her original mixed media series about family expectations and authentic identity, but surrounding those works was something unprecedented. A living documentation of what happened when a family chose transformation over tradition. Video screens displayed interviews with scholarship recipients. Audio recordings played snippets of conversations from the wedding reception, and interactive displays allowed visitors to explore the ripple effects of choosing courage over comfort. The lighting on the third panel needs to be adjusted, called Maria Santos, Whitney's chief curator, as she supervised the final preparations. We want to make sure visitors can see the texture work in Sophia's piece about breaking away from prescribed paths. Marcus appeared at Sophia's elbow, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the museum cafe. 3 months of transition had changed him visibly. Gone was the stressed corporate lawyer who had publicly humiliated his sister. In his place stood someone who looked genuinely at peace for the first time in years. Hard to believe this all started with me being a complete ass at Emily's wedding, he said, handing her the coffee. Don't sell yourself short, Sophia replied with a grin. You were a spectacularly complete ass. Really went all out. They stood together watching the installation process, comfortable in a way that would have been impossible just months earlier. Marcus's transition to nonprofit legal work had been smoother than anyone expected, largely because his corporate law experience had given him exactly the skills needed to navigate complex immigration cases. How's the Peterson case going? Sophia asked, referring to Marcus's current client, a family seeking asylum from political persecution. We got approval yesterday, Marcus said, his face lighting up. 3 kids who will now grow up safe and free instead of hiding in fear. Their oldest daughter wants to study art, actually. I gave her your scholarship fund. Information. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Marcus's new career was now actively supporting the exact kind of unconventional path he'd once criticized Sophia for choosing. Dr. Walsh approached their group, her heels clicking against the polished concrete floor. In the months since the wedding, she'd become not just a mentor to Sophia, but something approaching a family friend, someone who understood both the art world and the complex dynamics of families learning to support each other's authentic choices. The Times Review came out this morning, she announced, holding up her phone with obvious satisfaction. 5 stars. They're calling it a revolutionary approach to biographical exhibition that demonstrates how personal courage can create social change. She began reading from the review. Adams's artwork would be compelling enough on its own, but the documentation of her family's transformation from critics to champions creates a powerful narrative about the cost and value of authenticity. This isn't just an art exhibition, It's a case study in how individual courage can inspire collective growth. Sophia felt the familiar flutter of disbelief that still accompanied every new recognition of her work. The girl who had sat in that business finance class 3 years ago, sketching in the margins instead of taking notes, would never have imagined standing in the Whitney Museum reading reviews of her own exhibition. "There's more," Dr. Walsh continued. "The Harrison Foundation called this morning. They want to expand the scholarship program nationally. They're proposing a $2 million grant over 5 years to create Adams Foundation chapters in 10 major cities." Marcus nearly choked on his coffee. $2 million? "Sophia, do you realize what that means?" "It means we could help thousands of students," Sophia replied, her mind already racing with possibilities. Kids in rural areas who don't have access to arts programs, students whose families can't afford supplies or classes, young people who are facing the same choice I faced, between family approval and personal authenticity. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Emily and David, who had driven up from the city specifically for the exhibition opening. Emily looked radiant in a way that had nothing to do with her recent marriage, and everything to do with watching her sister's dreams unfold on a scale none of them had dared imagine. "The line outside is already forming," Emily announced breathlessly. "There are news crews from 3 different networks, and I just saw the mayor's car pulling up." David nodded, looking slightly overwhelmed by the media attention. "The guest list for tonight's opening reads like a who's who of the art world, plus half the nonprofit community, plus what appears to be every family therapist in the tri-state area." Dr. Walsh laughed. "The therapeutic community has been fascinated by your family's story. There are already 3 academic papers being written about the wedding reception as a case study in family systems theory." "Great," Marcus said dryly. "I'm going to be famous in psychology textbooks as an example of how not to handle sibling relationships." "Actually," said a new voice behind them, "you're going to be famous as an example of how families can transform when they choose growth over being right." They turned to see Dr. Jennifer Kim, a family therapist from Columbia University who had been documenting the Addams family's journey as part of her research into how creative pursuits affect family dynamics. "The interviews I conducted with your parents were particularly revealing," Dr. Kim continued. "They've started attending family therapy together, not because they're having problems, but because they want to understand how to better support unconventional life choices." "Your mother mentioned that she's actually considering going back to school herself." Sophia's eyebrows shot up. "Mom's going back to school? For what?" "Art therapy," Emily replied with a smile. "She wants to work with kids who are struggling with family expectations around career choices. Apparently, watching your transformation inspired her to think about how she could help other families avoid the mistakes she feels she made." The revelation added another layer to what had already become an extraordinary story of generational change. Patricia Adams, who had spent 3 years worrying that her daughter was ruining her life by leaving Columbia, was now preparing to dedicate her own career to helping young people navigate similar challenges. "And your father?" Dr. Walsh asked. "Dad's been volunteering with Marcus's nonprofit," David replied. "Turns out his accounting background is exactly what they needed to manage their financial operations more efficiently. He's talking about taking early retirement to work there full-time." Marcus shook his head in amazement. "6 months ago, our family dinners were exercises in passive-aggressive tension. Now, we're accidentally creating a multi-generational social justice organization." The transformation was interrupted by Maria Santos approaching with a clipboard and an urgent expression. "Sophia, we need to do a final walkthrough before the doors open. The interactive elements need your approval. And there are a few technical issues with the audio component." As they walked through the exhibition space, Sophia was struck by how the Whitney team had managed to capture not just her artistic journey, but the broader story of what happens when authenticity is valued over conformity. The final room of the exhibition was dedicated to letters from scholarship recipients, young artists who had been able to pursue their dreams because of the fund that had grown out of that. "Disastrous wedding toast. This letter particularly moved me," Maria said, stopping in front of a display case containing a handwritten note from a 16-year-old student in Detroit. She writes about how your story gave her the courage to tell her parents she wanted to study photography instead of pre-med. Sophia read the letter, her eyes filling with tears as she absorbed the teenager's words. Seeing someone succeed by disappointing people temporarily in order to honor themselves permanently made me realize that my parents' love for me is bigger than their fear for my future. That's it, Sophia said quietly. That's the whole point. Helping families understand that supporting someone's authentic path isn't abandoning them, it's trusting them. Marcus appeared beside her, reading over her shoulder. You know what's crazy? I spent 3 years thinking you were being selfish by pursuing art. But looking at all these kids you've helped, all these families you've inspired to have better conversations, your choice to leave Columbia has probably had more positive social impact than my entire corporate law career ever could have. That's because your corporate law career wasn't aligned with your values, Dr. Walsh observed. Success without authenticity often feels hollow, while authenticity with purpose creates the kind of impact that extends far beyond individual achievement. As the final preparations continued around them, Sophia found herself thinking about that moment 3 years ago, when she'd walked past the art building at Columbia and seen students working on the climate change mural. She'd recognized something in their faces that had been missing from her own life, the sense that their work mattered beyond personal gain. Now, standing in the Whitney Museum, surrounded by evidence of how her choice had rippled outward to affect hundreds of other young people, she finally understood what those Columbia art students had been experiencing. The deep satisfaction of knowing that your authentic work creates space for other people to live more authentically too. 5 minutes until doors open, announced a museum staffer. And suddenly the gallery was buzzing with final activity as the opening reception prepared to begin. The Whitney Museum's grand opening reception was unlike anything Sophia had ever experienced. As the doors opened and guests began flowing into the exhibition space, she watched from a corner near the entrance as complete strangers encountered. Her life story transformed into art. The first group, through, was a family, parents with 2 teenage daughters, who stopped. Immediately at the introductory panel explaining the origins of the atom's documentation. Sophia couldn't hear their conversation, but she watched the parents' expressions shift from curiosity to something deeper as they absorbed the story of the wedding toast that had changed everything. Nervous? Asked Jake, appearing at her side wearing an actual suit for what might have been the first time in his adult life. Terrified, Sophia admitted. It's one thing to create art about your personal life. It's another thing entirely to watch hundreds of people experience your family's most vulnerable moments. But as they watched the crowd move through the exhibition, something remarkable began happening. Instead of the typical art opening atmosphere of polite appreciation and wine-fueled small talk, the space filled with intense, meaningful conversations. Families clustered around the video displays. Teenagers pointed excitedly at the scholarship recipient letters, and parents could be seen having whispered but animated discussions with their adult children. Dr. Walsh materialized beside them, her face glowing with professional satisfaction. I've been in this business for 3 decades, and I've never seen an exhibition generate this kind of immediate emotional response. Look around. This isn't just art appreciation. This is therapy happening in real time. Indeed, throughout the gallery space, the Addams family story was catalyzing conversations that clearly extended far beyond the artwork itself. Near the section dedicated to Marcus's transformation, Sophia spotted a middle-aged man in an expensive suit deep in conversation with what appeared to be his college-aged son, both of them gesturing animatedly at the display about career authenticity versus family expectations. There's something I need to tell you, Jake said, his voice unusually serious. I've been accepted to the graduate program in social work at NYU. I'm going to specialize in family therapy, specifically working with families navigating conflicts around career choices and life paths. Sophia stared at her cousin, processing this unexpected revelation. Jake, that's incredible. But when did you even apply? I thought you were planning to stay in accounting. I applied the week after Emily's wedding, he replied with a sheepish grin. Watching our family transform that night, seeing how much pain everyone had been carrying because we didn't know how to talk to each other about what really mattered, I realized I wanted to help other families before they reached a crisis point. The ripple effects of that evening continued to amaze her. What had begun as Marcus's attempt to publicly shame her had somehow become a catalyst for multiple people to examine and realign their own life choices. "There's Dr. Kim." Jake pointed across the room to where the family therapist was being interviewed by a journalist. "She told me she's using your family's story as the foundation for a new therapeutic approach she's developing." Marcus approached their group, his face flushed with excitement and what appeared to be genuine amazement. "Sophia, you need to see this. There's a whole section of the guest book where people are writing about decisions they've been afraid to make, changes they want to implement in their own families. It's like your exhibition is giving people permission to have conversations they've been avoiding for years." He led them to a station where visitors could leave written responses to the exhibition. The comments were extraordinary. Parents apologizing to adult children for not supporting their creative pursuits, young people expressing gratitude for inspiration to pursue authentic paths, families planning difficult but necessary conversations about happiness versus external success. One entry particularly caught Sophia's attention. "My daughter left medical school last year to become a chef, and I've been disappointed and worried ever since. Tonight I realized I've been grieving the loss of my dreams for her instead of celebrating her courage to pursue her own dreams. Tomorrow I'm calling to tell her how proud I am." "This is what I never understood about your work," Marcus said quietly, reading over her shoulder. "I thought art was supposed to be beautiful or impressive or technically skilled. I didn't realize it could be functional, that it could actually change how people live their lives." Dr. Walsh, overhearing the comment, nodded approvingly. "That's exactly what the most powerful contemporary art does. It doesn't just reflect reality, it provides tools for transforming reality." Sophia's work does both. The evening's most surreal moment came when the mayor of New York approached Sophia with a proposition that seemed too extraordinary to be real. "Ms. Adams, I've been following the development of your scholarship program, and I have a proposal. The city wants to partner with the Adams Foundation to create a comprehensive arts mentorship program for public school students." She outlined a plan that would integrate Sophia's approach into the municipal education system, creating pathways for young people to explore creative careers while maintaining family support systems. The program would include family counseling components, financial literacy education specifically for creative careers, and mentorship networks connecting students with professional artists who had navigated similar family dynamics. "We're talking about a $5 million municipal investment over 3 years, the mayor continued, "with the potential for this to become a national model for how cities can support young people in pursuing unconventional but meaningful career paths." Sophia felt dizzy. From college dropout working 3 restaurant jobs to citywide policy influencer, in less than 4 years, the trajectory seemed impossible even as she was living. The evening's emotional climax came when Patricia and Robert Adams took the microphone during the formal remarks portion of the reception. Sophia hadn't known they were planning to speak, and she watched with mounting anxiety as her parents approached the podium. "3 years ago," Patricia began, her voice steady but emotional, "our daughter made a choice that we thought was a terrible mistake. We spent months trying to convince her to return to the path we believed would provide security and success. Tonight, surrounded by evidence of how wrong we were, we want to publicly apologize, not just to Sophia, but to any other young person whose authentic dreams we may have inadvertently discouraged." Robert took over, his businessman's composure wavering as he spoke. "We want other parents to learn from our mistakes. When your children choose paths that scare you, the answer isn't to withdraw support, it's to educate yourselves about their choices and find ways to help them succeed on their own terms." He gestured around the museum gallery. "Everything you see here tonight, the scholarship program, the family transformation, the hundreds of young people who will benefit from this foundation, all of it exists because our daughter had the courage to disappoint us temporarily in order to honor herself. Permanently, the applause was thunderous. But more importantly, it was genuine. Parents throughout the crowd were clearly moved by this public acknowledgement of how family support could evolve and grow as the formal reception wound down and guests began, filtering out into the New York evening. The Addams family found themselves alone in the gallery space for a few precious moments. They walked through the exhibition together, seeing their story reflected back at them through the lens of art and social impact. "You know what's funny?" Emily said, pausing in front of the wedding reception video display. 6 months ago, I was worried that Marcus's toast would ruin my wedding. Now it's probably going to be remembered as the moment our family learned how to actually love each other. Marcus laughed, but there was profound gratitude in his expression. "The best mistake I ever made. Though I still can't believe it took public humiliation to teach me how to be a decent brother." "Sometimes transformation requires extreme circumstances," Dr. Walsh observed, joining their family circle. "The beautiful thing about your story is that it demonstrates how individual courage can create permission for collective change." As they prepared to leave the museum, Sophia took one final look around the space that housed her life's work. Tomorrow, thousands of visitors would walk through these rooms and encounter a story about the power of choosing authenticity over approval. Some would be parents learning to support children's unconventional dreams. Others would be young people finding courage to pursue meaningful work despite family pressure. But tonight, looking at her family, Marcus excited about his immigration law cases, Emily glowing with newfound respect for difficult choices, her parents planning their own career transitions toward more meaningful work, Sophia realized that the most important transformation had happened not in the art gallery, but in the relationships that had been damaged by misunderstanding and healed by truth. "So," Jake said with a grin as they walked toward the museum exit, "what's next for the Addams family's social justice empire?" Sophia looked around at the people she loved most, all of them now aligned in supporting authentic choices and meaningful work. "Whatever it is," she said, "we'll figure it out together." As they stepped out into the New York night, the city lights reflecting off the museum's windows behind them, Sophia felt something she'd never experienced before. The deep satisfaction of being exactly who she was meant to be, surrounded by people who finally understood and celebrated that choice. The girl who had walked away from Columbia University 3 years ago could never have imagined this moment. But then again, the most authentic paths are rarely the ones we can envision from the beginning. They're the ones we discover by having the courage to take the first step into uncertainty, trusting that meaning will emerge from the willingness to choose truth over comfort. Behind them, the Whitney Museum glowed against the darkness, filled with the story of a family that learned to transform disappointment into support, judgment into understanding, and fear into love. And tomorrow, that story would begin inspiring new transformations in families they'd never meet, in cities they'd never visit, in young people just beginning to discover their own courage to choose authenticity over approval. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is live your truth loudly, enough that other people remember they have permission to live theirs too. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.